All right. Well, welcome to our TDG meeting for the 27th of March. This is our third week in a row. We've been keeping busy. Let's just like to kick off the meeting with an acknowledgement of country. So we acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land on which we all gather today. We pay our respects to elders past, present and emerging, and extend our respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people. We acknowledge the First Peoples as the first scientists, educators and healers. So looking at the agenda for this week, we've got our usual business. Then Steph's going to do a report back on the Connectathon that was last week. We're also going to do a quick run through of what we talked about last week in the TDG as well, which was not our normal session. That was on the Tuesday. So we'll go through the stuff that we talked about in request groups and finish that off because we didn't get through it all. We've still got some discussion around notes to go through in that. And then we've also got the eRequesting R1 feature prioritization, which again is something we didn't get through entirely last week. So jam-packed agenda for today. As always. So jumping into the usual business, we have minutes for approval. So in the last meeting, we went through briefly the 13th of March minutes, and the 18th of March minutes are the ones from last Tuesday. So we won't look to approve those today. We'll just have a quick look at them, give you the opportunity to review those over the coming week, and we'll approve those in the next meeting. But we will look to approve the 13th of March minutes if everyone's happy with that. So I think we've got the link in the chat there for the 13th of March. Looks like it may have changed slightly. But we've got our recording, we've got all the minutes and our decisions from there. Just wondering if anyone needs any more time to review these or have any comments or updates to that. Otherwise, if not, does someone want a motion to accept these minutes from the 13th of March?
I'm happy to motion, Jamie.
Jamie, do we have a second? Oh. Does anyone need more time if we can not vote on them today? If I see a second, Rosemary has put a second in the chat. So we have a second. So I will launch the poll. Polls. Approval of minutes. So you should see that poll now for approving these minutes. It looks like we've got most people voted, so we'll just give that a 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. So I'll end that poll. So we have 12 plus 1 in the chat, so 13 affirmative. We have 0 negative, and we have 10 abstain. So that motion has passed. Now, the other minutes were the ones that from last Tuesday, which was a Teams call, not a Zoom call. So these are here now for you to review. We've got a copy of the recording. You'll see it's slightly different format because it was an in-person event. And we've got the presentation and the transcript. Again, it was a Teams meeting, so slightly different format to you're normally seeing, but we do have it all there. And we've got a set of minutes with some copies of the mentees and the like where we discuss different topics. So that's out for review. We won't look to prove that today because there hasn't been enough time for everyone to have a look. But please go to this page. If you've got any comments or updates, you can make them on the page or comment at the bottom, and we'll look to approve those in the next meeting. Back to the slides. Action items. We've still got a number of outstanding action items here. We've got the proposal for the task business status that's still here in our backlog. It just keeps dropping off the end of the meetings. We will get to it eventually. It's just we haven't been able to get through all the agenda items completely, so it's still there. It will come through as soon as we're ready. As for the CDG and TDG on principles for inclusion and scope, there is a harmonisation group meeting that is going to kick off next week, which is the first one. So that's where we may bring up the sex for clinical use that we've put in the IG that may need to go through that harmonisation group, but that will be discussed next week. So that action item is still open, but it is progressing. And then I think we've got two with Jai and Ruben for about the related person, whether we should be using related person for consent withdrawal and follow up on the My Health Record Policy reference URI. I'm not sure Jai's in the call. Ruben, do you have any update on the URI or anything?
Not at this time, but hopefully by next week.
Yep. Okay. So we'll leave those open. Now some other admin around daylight saving finishes the end of next week, so the 6th of April. Currently our meetings are 11 a.m. Australian Eastern Standard Time, which is 12 p.m. Australian Eastern Daylight Time. So we just need to confirm what time we're going to go to moving forward. So this will be for our next meeting moving forward. So we have two options here. One is to keep the 11 a.m. Australian Eastern Standard Time. I'll put some other time zones in there. Hopefully I got those right. Or option two is change to the 12 p.m. Australian Eastern Standard Time. So I was just going to launch a poll for that, so we can just get an indication of which meeting time we want moving forward. I will find a poll for that. Okay, so hopefully you'll see a poll about which time we'd like moving forward. Okay, I'll just give that another 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Okay, good to go. So I'll just end that poll. I think that's fairly conclusive. We have 18 people that want to keep the 11 a.m. Australian Eastern Standard Time. We have 4 people wanting to change to 12 p.m. Australian Eastern Standard Time, and we had 8 with no preference or happy with either. So I think that's a fairly clear winner, that we maintain that 11 a.m. Eastern Standard Time moving forward from the next meeting. We can obviously revisit this as a TDG at any point in time. So we will move forward with that for the next meeting. But if the times need to change in the future, we can do that as a TDG. Next bit of usual business is in 2 meetings time. We have a meeting that's on Thursday, the 24th of April. So this is right in the middle of a short week. We've got the Monday, which is Easter Monday. We have Friday, which is Anzac Day. I think it's the middle of school holidays as well. So we want to make sure that we've got enough people available to hold that meeting. So I just want to launch a poll too to see what interest there is in holding that meeting, given that there may be limited availability of people during that week. So I've got another poll here. Let me launch this. I think I've got the wrong one. So this is a poll just to say whether we should hold that meeting. Looking to get your indication as whether there's enough people interested in having that meeting. Okay, I think we have most people having voted now. So I will end that poll and I'll share the results. So it looks at this stage like we had 14 people say that they're available and happy to meet at that time. We had 10 people saying they won't be available, and we have 5 people that were unsure. So it's close, but I think that indicates that there is interest in holding that meeting then. As with all our meetings, they're recorded and minuted. So they are available for people who can't attend at the time. Does anyone disagree with the thought that we actually should hold that meeting, go ahead with that meeting? I think we've got enough of a consensus to continue. I think by the look of that, though, we will continue with that meeting. We might just test the waters again on the 10th of April, just in case people have firmer plans. But at this stage, I think it looks like we will continue with that meeting, which is good. We've got lots to get through, so it's always good to have more meetings. Okay. So that's the end of usual business. The next step is going to take us through a report back from last week's Connectathon. Steph, you happy? I'll just do the slides.
Yeah, use the slides. Thank you. Hi, everyone. I'd like to share a brief overview of the AU eRequesting track from last week's HL7AU Connectathon. So some of our track goals, they were around exploring the ecosystem participants as AU eRequesting actors as defined in the spec, being able to create and access diagnostic requests for pathology and imaging, and testing real-world implementations against the current snapshot of the eRequesting IG, so we could assess alignment and really gather useful feedback to iteratively improve on the spec. Next slide. So here's a list of our track participants, and the track provided a great opportunity for these organizations to collaborate, test real-world implementations, and validate interoperability based on the eRequesting IG. And over to our notable achievements. Here's a brief overview of what our track participants explored. And for a more detailed report back, that's available on the Connectathon track page, which I'll drop into the chat. So just as a summary. Yep, so I'll just put that in the chat. Kestrel worked on testing and hardening their fire filler solution, which included their broker NextGen Connect, also known as Mirth, with connections to multiple eRequesting repositories from the likes of Magentis, Sonic, and Aidbox. They noted it was a really useful activity that also highlighted the importance of solution architectures that support easier integration with multiple ecosystem participants. Sonic implemented AU eRequesting profile validation on their current implementation with the .NET Fire validator and demonstrated successful alignment with sparked HL7AU profiles. And their filler system successfully consumed Telstra Health eRequests with AU eRequesting validation turned on. We noted a few systems were implementing the dollar claim operation for exchange of eRequests between labs. And we also saw participants exploring the use of e-tags to prevent resource conflicts between clients. Overall, the collaborative alignment in developing the spec has really allowed, for example, our work on task tags has enabled a move away from the use of local code systems, which of course lends itself to improved interoperability. Next slide. So in terms of the issues that we encountered and any feedback items, there was a JIRA issue raised around the placer order identifier requirements to support backwards compatibility, and Michael will be going into that in more detail next. And we also identified an issue with how e-tags were passed, which was resolved during the Connectathon, improving support for conditional updates using if match. And we discussed the broader use of service requests for referrals and the potential role of a communication-based profile to support related workflows. Before I hand back to Michael to go through that JIRA ticket that was raised, wanted to check if anyone wanted to share their experiences from the Connectathon or cover off anything that we may have missed in the report back.
Well, that's all good. Thanks, Steph.
Thanks.
It was definitely a great event. We had a lot more to test with eRequesting now. We've done a lot of work this year on developing new profiles and the like. So it was definitely a good opportunity. We've started where we didn't have much to test at all, and got to a point now where we do have a much more complete IG, which is nice to see, and start exercising that. One of the issues that Steph did talk about was raised by Adrian Hunt from Kestrel, and this was around the placer order identifier. So currently we have that as an optional field on the diagnostic request, and so this JIRA issue was raised around wanting to make that mandatory, making the placer order identifier mandatory for diagnostic requests. And I think the key reason for this was around support for backward compatibility with HL7 v2. So when converting a HL7 a fire service request to a HL7 v2 message, there was the need for an identifier, and we'd made it optional, so it didn't have to be there. And this is so that the service requests could be individually identified within the group. Another issue was identified if we were just to use GUIDs there, they'd be too long for a V2 message. And the workaround that was being used at the Connectathon was actually, well, fabricate the IDs. So as the filler system, fabricating them and then posting them back to update them, which was not ideal. But that was the only workaround we sort of had at the moment when it's not available. Adrian, are you on the call? Did you want to talk any more about this issue?
Yeah, I am. Thanks, Michael. Look, that's pretty much it. So the background on this is that we found for radiology orders coming into our client systems, they'll often break them up. They'll often break the groups out into individual services, and that's not just it's not just for different modalities, but it's say for different body parts. So an X-ray, say for a hand and an ankle, might be split into two separate requests inside the system and two separate reports in the end as well. Yeah, so really for us, it's about a way to make tracking that a lot easier, because I understand that pathology things tend to stay grouped quite often. So yeah, and yeah, it comes down to that backwards compatibility. I mean, I'm trying to avoid storing data, I guess, and making our broker stateless. So the other answer is we could store that data somewhere, but it doesn't seem like it's a great idea or something I really want to do, to be honest. So yeah.
Yep.
Hmm.
Thanks, Adrian. Does anyone else want to comment? I think this is a good idea that we'd look to make this mandatory. Does anyone else see this as a common problem or something that,
I'll comment before
Yeah.
I know Andy poo-poos a little. So I ran into the same sort of issue, but not quite with as badly as Adrian did. So again, like we're converting a lot of this down to V2 orders and sending them to our system, and we also had the requirement that we needed a place order number. So this is an identifier per service request, if you will, for the V2 order. But we don't, it's part of the V2 spec, I believe, or at least it's part of our Apollo list spec that you can't not give it one of these, a complaint, right? So I just synthesize GUIDs as they come in, but they have no real purpose for us. They just like to satisfy the spec of the V2 message, and we don't use them in any way, unlike Adrian, who actually does use them. I do use a GUID, which, you know, there's sort of haziness there with V2, whether there are size limitations on fields. There certainly was the early days of V2. There kind of
It
seems to be
depends
lot
if your
of
system
relaxation of it.
implements them. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
Yep,
Yep.
yep.
So just because some boffin said, "Oh no, the limits don't apply anymore," it doesn't mean that all the software implementations out there also did that. They still error if the size is too big. So I do use a GUID because ours doesn't error, but appreciate others that's problematic. But I think it's also very problematic to enforce that some other system has to now give you a unique identifier that is not a GUID, because that's really hard. You now have to keep your own key running somewhere. It's problematic in itself, right? So I'm probably not entirely behind the idea of, if we're doing this, them not being GUIDs. I think probably they should be allowed to be GUIDs. And I don't know how much I'm sold on it. Like I said, we don't need it, but I can understand Adrian's concern. We're certainly not breaking requests apart like he is. I guess that's all my comments.
Andy?
Yes, Angus and I have talked about this over the years. I guess for me, this is, and we've talked about it in the Sparked as well. And it seems that this is really two issues, because it's not just about making the place or order identifier mandatory. That wouldn't necessarily help Adrian if obviously we were using GUIDs as those place or order identifiers. So it's making constraints then on the kinds of identifiers that a place or identifier could actually be. And I guess I am reluctant to mandate those kind of constraints into FHIR just for kind of backward compatibility reasons. I do wonder whether there's a way of synthesizing from a GUID something that would meet the need of that version 2 size limited identifier. Obviously, there's the discussion we had in Sparked was, well, there's already an identifier and it's actually the ID. Obviously, the issue Adrian has is we're not putting any constraints then on those IDs in terms of their size. And that's obviously doesn't really help the problem.
You mean resource ID?
Yeah.
Yeah.
In terms of its use from the places perspective, when we were talking about placer identifiers initially, we kind of weren't in a position of ever needing to go back and identify the single test or service that couldn't have otherwise been satisfied by a reference to that ID itself, rather than needing to have a business identifier associated with it. And I think that's where we kind of said, well, the kind of the compromise position is we would say that those placer identifiers are optional if you wanted to provide them, and that we weren't going to go down the kind of the mandatory path.
Maybe Adrian, explain what you do, because I'm also feel like what you do is a reasonable approach in itself. Like, explain what you do because the ID is not there.
Yeah, look, I think mandatory is potentially too strong as well. So I mean, obviously this is only a requirement if you're going into V2 land. So I mean, if you've got a full fire-based end-to-end system, then this becomes irrelevant, and you could use the resource identifiers, right? And I'll be fine with that. I guess that's the first thing. So what I'm doing is I actually just chop 4 or 5 sections out of the original GUID, and then I'm patching that back onto the places system.
So that was
for
the bit
later reference. Yeah.
So you're up when on the task, are you? So when you update the task to say, the next status, you're actually also adding an identifier to it that you then later retrieve, so you know where you're up to. Is that,
correct? It's not in the same stream, but it's around the same time. Yeah.
It's on the task, in the task identifier you put it.
You look whether I put it. Yeah, the task was just easiest for me, and I figured the task group identifier was on the task. So why wouldn't the individual be on the task itself? Yeah.
And are you using the AU local order identifier type and stuff? Or
yes, I just don't have. I was struggling to get hold of the correct HPIO to use
So I'm kind of personally, I'm kind of feel like that's quite a valid way. Like, instead of having a database, you're kind of storing the key in the resource rather than in the database.
Yeah, look, it seems like it's a reasonable workaround to me, but it does create extra steps in the process. So rather than just being able to pull the value as it comes back out of our system and then refer back to the repository to check whether my grouping updates are going to be correct, I actually need to place more. Yeah, I've got that extra step of adding that data in at some stage. So I would definitely still be doing that same step where I go off to the server to make sure my grouping updates are correct. Yeah.
So you would go get the group and then discover the IDs you'd placed on it before, and then you know where you're at.
Correct. Yeah. But I'd have to do that anyway.
Because you got to get them to update their task status.
Exactly. So if these groups get broken up, I need to go and do that anyway. So the only step that this would save me is adding or patching that identifier back.
Yeah. So it's not incurring an extra API call. It's just incurring a little bit of extra data in the task resource that you're putting
one extra API call. Yeah. Yeah.
Well, you're already doing that to modify the status change anyway.
Yeah, sure. But it's not in the same logic. But I see what you're saying. Yeah, I could do it all in together. Yeah.
And I mean, that was my suggestion to do it, because it's I didn't have any issues with there being fulfillment specific information that a filler wanted to add to that fulfillment, because it doesn't impact the original service request, and we kind of leave that fulfillment as kind of we've talked about before. It's really the focus for the filler, and it's not shared between fillers, so it's very much filler specific. So whatever pollution wants to be added into it, it's not really nice. Get off our nose.
Yeah. Okay.
So this in this scenario we're talking about, it would actually be a filler identifier rather than a placer identifier.
I create an identifier and patch it back as a filler. Yeah, a filler number.
Filler identifier and on the task. So I might just,
because of lack of placer order number.
Yeah, I might just jump to.
So I guess my other comment around restricting it was, don't we restrict the group number? Hasn't that got a set format? I don't think that would be a stretch.
We haven't approached that problem, but
okay, right. Yeah,
I wanted to have a strict format.
It seems like a few people are doing it the same way anyway. Is all I can say. Yeah.
But we haven't really gone down that rabbit hole.
Right.
So we haven't.
I mean, maybe it's something that could be optional. I mean, if you say like we'd like a placer identifier, it'd be nice if we could get it, I guess. But yeah.
Yeah, so what do we say at the moment? We just say nothing, do we? Just say there's an identifier thing here. We don't say anything about putting anything in it.
Well, it becomes the filler's, David. I think it becomes the filler's number if the filler creates it, basically.
Identifier. So there.
Yeah,
Identifier addition.
We haven't constrained anything on identifier, so it's just whatever, any identifier, you put whatever you like in there.
Yeah.
It's not even must support because we haven't identified it on the task as there's.
Yeah, and what Adrian's doing, I think that's completely reasonable, right? We're not saying this is something that everyone needs to do, but if you want to put an identifier on it to pull it off later, there's nothing wrong with that. And there's no, and it's your identifier, right? You're putting it there, you're getting it back off. So that who are we to say what it is and what it isn't?
But does the server need to support it? So the eRequesting server need to support it.
Support search by it, maybe, or
yeah, and support searches on it.
do you search by it, Adrian? You don't use it to retrieve it later, do you?
Good question.
You could.
So right. Put me on the spot.
Oh, you don't because you don't store in the database.
I don't yet. I think basically yeah. I'll probably pull back. What I do is I pull back the group, I would say, and then look through the group at each of the identifiers, right? To check my updates are correct, or if I want to update it all, right? So yeah.
I mean, I'm not sure why we would put any constraint on a filler being able to search via any one of the identifiers that was provided.
But we haven't put a constraint on
Yes,
servers that they must
we said
allow
no,
searching
there's
identifier.
no must support for a server to support it or to support any searching or anything.
No, I don't think it needs to be, but it would also not be disallowed. You're not allowed to search for a task based on an identifier.
But you won't be able to if the server's like a facade and it chose not to implement the search.
It's true.
But you could argue about this about everything, couldn't you? You could say, oh,
otherwise
someone might want to search by something else we didn't think of.
But we have found a use case here where it is being used. So if we would want to allow this use case, and especially in an environment where the server is has no relationship to the filler, that you'd want this functionality available to you.
I think must support on identifier would cover it, wouldn't it? You just have to be allowed to patch back or add an identifier. But as like searching is not critical, I think I'm searching by the group and then sifting through that.
Do you? Yeah. Yes, you don't, because you break things apart. Like you've got chest X-ray, left foot X-ray, and then in one, and then you break it. You treat them as two independent things.
Yep.
And then you get status updates about the foot X-ray, but not the chest X-ray.
Yep.
And then you look up the entire group, the foot and the left, and then update the status on one. But you could.
But I wouldn't. What I wouldn't.
You could look it up directly, couldn't you?
Yeah, but I'd always be looking at I always want to look at the group because I need to check that group to check the other statuses of the service requests or the tasks in that group. So if
because if they're all complete, you need to make the group complete.
Correct. Yeah, and if they're not all complete, then I'm not gonna flick it over. So yeah.
So we don't.
At least that's how it is in my mind at the moment, right? Yeah.
So we don't actually have a use case now, do we? We have an idea that you could check. Like Adrian doesn't actually have the use case to search or anything. He's just putting the identifier on and retrieving it later. He's not searching on it. We could. So if we even were to make this, Michael, it's like we don't actually have a use case. We have a thought bubble. Like,
well, for the search, I mean, I think that's clear. We don't have to do the search now, but the must support to support the server to support an AU local order identifier as an identifier. Optionally, it's a must support. So if you can use it if it's there. Otherwise, we're being silent and saying, well, the server can reject it because I don't know what an identifier is. I'm going to reject it.
Are you talking about a filler identifier or a placer identifier?
Well, that's right. We can just say we'll accept an AU local order identifier of any type, or we'll say slice it so it's only a filler identifier is the one we'll accept.
So today, like this could be anything, right? Like I could put my Angus special identifier on it, like
Yeah.
that. But that could be rejected today, couldn't it? Because we could go,
Yeah, your
"Oh,
facade, if you, like you said, the facade where it's just saying I've built this to the must supports, and if it's not must support, I don't have to accept it.
I feel like I want to be in a world where servers need to support identifiers without actually going as far as then saying what they are. Like support on identifier should be supported, but not any particular one, just any identifier.
Well, we can, by adding must support and identifier, it will then come in here, right? Is then whether there's a next step to also say that it can also be an AU local order identifier, right? That extension. And because again, you could then put any identifier on there, but you're trying to say it's a filler identifier, and it goes, no, I don't know what that is. I'm going to reject it.
I don't mind the idea of saying, you know, it can be one of these and it's optional, but I also want it to be and anything else you like.
Yeah.
Just
if you look at
no expectation of what's going to happen with it except being able to search on it.
If you look at the diagnostic request, which I think is which I thought is what we were originally talking about, but here we've got the identifier on a service request. It's must support. It's optional. You can have many, and it can be an identifier or an AU local order identifier. So we could apply that pattern to task. And here, it's up to you how to use it.
So it was the proposal almost to like replicate what we see there on task.
I think so. I think that's where the conversation went.
Yeah,
Adrian,
yeah, that sounds about it. Is task the right place for it? And Angus, you were saying maybe it should be on the service request.
No. I was just checking you would. I agree it should be on task, but I was just checking that was true.
Okay. Does Adrian, do you want to motion that?
Sure. Yeah. So that's for must support for identifier on the diagnostic. Sorry,
it is.
Base.
Sorry, I'll go back.
Yeah.
It is the. Now, is it on the base, the task base?
It has to be.
Yeah. Okay. So AU eRequesting task. Identify. Sorry, not too far. So your motion was then for must support an identifier and a local order identifier?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
That covers place order numbers, filler order numbers, other order numbers, I think.
Yeah. Okay. So just to summarize, the motion is to add must support to the eRequesting task with identifier and AU local order identifier as the support types.
If I could just quickly jump in, we're not trying to say that this particular identifier is a medical identifier versus a technology identifier, right? Could be a system generated one, I guess, as opposed to something that's meaningful in the business realm.
It's just a business identifier. That's so, and there's no further classification. I think that we're going beyond that to say whether it's clinically relevant or administratively relevant or anything else. It's just distinguishing it from the ID.
And we're trying to open up the search. We're trying to get to the world where you can put any old identifier you like in there, and you can then go search by that identifier on the server. What that identifier is, we're not going to say, right? You could be what Adrian wants. It could be anything you want. It just means you can tag it and then search for this thing later by that tag, by that identifier.
Yeah. And I guess all I was trying to do is recognize, was this identifier you put in, was it generated by a computer so that we could uniquely identify something, or was it something in the medical business that says, no, this uniquely identifies this task? And just so that we know that we're talking about a business concept or a concept that we've generated because we can't find something in the business.
I think Adrian's context was the technical identifier.
Yeah.
But we're not talking about a clinical workflow identifier.
It
Yeah,
may be used downstream, possibly in our systems, depending on configuration. So I guess that's one thing. But yeah, I mean, really, it's just for me to track individual tasks. Is the main purpose of it, David. Yeah.
I hear you. Thanks.
I think just looking at these obligations too, it potentially needs to swap between the placer and the filler, because it would be a filler populate if known rather than a placer populate if known.
Is it populate if known? Like, no, if what's known, what some unknown identifier is known.
Yeah, well, if it's unknown, it's not known, right? So
yeah, I suppose. Able to pop? No.
Yeah.
Yeah, maybe.
Well,
able to populate?
Yeah.
Populate if known feels a little weird to me, because it's like, well, no, like we're not saying, even if you know it, we're not saying you have to populate it. You can populate it if you like.
Yeah, that doesn't actually apply, because I would know eventually. I would know a placer number in our system, but I'm not always going to patch it back. Yeah. Yeah.
So able to populate.
Yeah, able to populate feels better to me.
On the filler and no error on the placer. This placer doesn't have to care about it.
Yeah, it's no error for place. Is it not just no error to anyone and handle for the server? Like
Yeah, it could be.
We're saying the placer doesn't need to do anything. They just don't error if you find some identifiers in here. Same with a filler. We're not saying you must. We're just saying don't error if you find some identifiers in here. In the handle and the server we want the server to handle that there are identifiers here and the search against them.
Yeah, potentially it's no error for all actors except the server, which is handle and able to populate.
Yeah.
I guess as long as you know what type of identifier you're looking at, then that's half the battle too, right? What identifier type am I looking for? Or I guess if I populate it, I know.
Yeah, I think that's how we're framing it.
Yeah.
We're framing it that if you want to put something there because you want to retrieve it later using that, then go crazy. Like,
I hear that. That sounds better.
Okay. Adrian, were you happy with those obligations for your motion?
Yeah, sounds good. Yep.
Okay. So adding identifier, local identifier must support on eRequesting task with the obligations of no error for all actors, and except for server, which will have shall handle and shall able to populate. Yep.
Does handle enforce the server to handle the search?
No, we'd have to specify search. If we want to add search, we'd have to add a search. So we also want this search supported.
Yeah, so I wouldn't say that as required yet. There's no.
Oh well, I'd like to think the server supports search, but not on any particular identifier, just on identifiers.
You can add that friendly amendment, I guess.
Does this violate anything to do with fillers updating service requests?
It's not the service request, it's the task.
No, that's the diagnostic request you got.
Sorry, that's what we've got on diagnostic request. We're going to apply this pattern on task.
Okay. Confusing me.
Yeah, sorry.
Got nothing to look at if you look at the task.
Yeah, it's not on the task. There's nothing there. Angus, we're going to add.
I feel like I want the amendment that the server has to support search. Like it has to handle and allow search, but not as restrictive to say search on any particular type. Just search on identifiers.
Search identifier.
Well, yeah. Even just identify the type of identifier. It needs to support the search type of identifier.
Okay. Does someone want to second this motion?
So, searching on just quickly on searching on identifiers, are you expecting a single row to return, or you're happy to get multiple rows even though you think it's unique? It could be.
This is all fire search. It will be. We wouldn't define how the fire search works for identifier. It is defined in the search spec
Yeah, so
somewhere.
you potentially could get many. It's up to
Yeah.
you. It's like it's only you understand the identifier you're searching for and what it means, because we're not going to define it.
Yes, Angus, thanks again for reminding me that. Sorry.
Okay.
Oh, and I'll second that.
Okay, second. Thanks, Dave. Okay. I will launch poll for the acceptance of this. Is there any more questions, comments? Anyone unsure about what we're voting on?
Can I just have the motion one more time, slowly and clearly for the minutes?
Okay.
Thank you.
I will try it. So we want to make identifier must support on eRequesting task, supporting identifier and AU local order identifier with obligations of no error on all actors except eRequesting server, which shall support handle and shall support able to populate.
In search.
Thank you.
Oh,
Right.
and the server needs to support search on identifier.
Thank you.
As
Well done. Yeah.
I'll lodge that poll. Okay, just give that 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. I'll end that poll. So we have 19 affirmative plus 1 in the chat. So 20 affirmative, 0 negative, and 8 have abstained. So that motion has passed. So that was really good. I think that's exactly the point of Connectathons and the like, when we start testing the spec, see what problems people have with their systems, what we need to change, what we need to support. So this has been a really valuable exercise. And I think as we move forward and we do more testing and more implementations come about, we'll get more of these issues come up. So please do the same as Adrian's done, raise JIRA issues. We can discuss them in TDGs and try and resolve these issues. So it's a good exercise. Okay, getting on to request group feature discussion. So we went through this last Tuesday. So I'm just going to do a quick summary of what we went through and then jump in and finish it off with where we got up to. So on Tuesday, we talked about the current group features that we have for eRequesting. So we were talking about each diagnostic request is self-contained and operates independently. We have a placer group number that's used to link multiple diagnostic requests that were created as part of the same order. The diagnostic request display sequence matches the sequences seen on the paper request form. And the task group is used by the filler for the management and fulfillment of tasks for the same order. So I've got a little visual of what that looks like. We've got the diagnostic request, which has requisition, which is the placer group number, and that's the same across all items in the order. And we have a display sequence, so they can be displayed in a certain sequence on the screen. In the diagnostic request task, we have the group identifier, which is the same placer group number that's on the diagnostic request. We have the focus, which points to the diagnostic request that the task belongs to. And we have part of making that task part of the task group. And then in the task group, it has the group identifier, which is the same as everything else in the group, which is the placer group number. So that's what we have now. This is already in the IG. So then we had a bit of discussion and had a Menti on are there any other request group features that we would want in eRequesting? And so the key one that came out of that was the one in the middle there, which is clinical notes. And that's where we want to continue the discussion today. We just started it last Tuesday, and we'll talk about that use of clinical notes in a request group.
Michael, if you're displaying something, I'm not seeing it.
Oh, are you not? Hmm. Is anyone else saying it?
I can see it.
We can see it.
Okay.
Yeah, I can see
Okay.
it.
There you go. Oh,
Put your glasses on,
I
David.
must have- yeah.
I had it
There's a-
before, it like shrunk itself up to the top right corner.
Okay, I must have clicked something I shouldn't have.
There's a
Thanks.
tab up the top. You might have to click on the tab.
Okay. Other
Thanks.
than I can't see it, are there any other questions on what we have now around this? Anyone who wasn't there or had any further comments on understanding what we have now and what we might need moving forward? But we had a good discussion about that last week. You'll see it in the minutes and you can see the recording as well if you weren't able to attend. We also discussed then what the fire guidance is for ServiceRequest groups. So this is the guidance from the fire spec on ServiceRequest. There's in scope and usage. It says this resource is a request resource from a fire workflow perspective. And request resources describe what activity is desired, authorized. Requests do not track the execution of fulfillment. So as a service request, as we've set up in eRequesting, is that what is ordered, whereas we use tasks to actually track the execution and the fulfillment of that service request. So the service request resource allows requesting only a single procedure. If workflow requires requesting multiple procedures simultaneously, this is done using multiple instances of this resource. These instances can be linked in different ways depending on the needs of the workflow. And then it refers to the fire request pattern for that guidance. That fire request pattern, again, we went through this, so I'm just racing through this so we don't go through all the detail again, but happy to answer questions if anyone has them. So the fire request pattern is a pattern to be followed by resources that represent a specific proposal, plan, and order for some sort of action or service. And within that pattern, there is a description of compound requests. And it says there are 3 different ways to define compound requests in fire. It's a shared requisition ID, a based on chain, or request group, which in R5 has actually been renamed to request orchestration. So we went through each of those and noted that we're actually already using the shared requisition ID. That's our place of group number. We've actually already applied that pattern to AU eRequesting, and we were just reassuring that that was the right pattern we were following. And so we ran a Menti on that, and it was overwhelmingly agreed that that was the correct pattern that we were using for service request groups. I think we've got in the chat, or someone will place in the chat with the links, some of those links just to those pages if you do want to read them. Again, it's in the minutes, the recording and the like from last week, if you do want to follow up on that. But happy to take any questions now if anyone has any on those sort of different patterns used for grouping. No. Okay, that's good. We can keep moving forward. So this is where we got up to. We started to talk about the pattern for notes, given that was something that was seen that we hadn't necessarily addressed in request grouping. And I'll just go through this guidance now. We'll put that link in the chat. But this is actually new guidance, well, guidance that's in R5. It's not in the R4 request pattern, but it has been added to the R5 guidance. But it is relevant for what we're doing, so I'll just go through that. So this is where it talks about both the note and supporting info element provide additional supporting or contextual information about the overall request. However, they have slightly different purposes. So this is where in a service request, in a diagnostic request, we have a note, and we also have a supporting info element. So this is talking about the differences between those. So in the request pattern for notes, notes can be clinical or administrative in nature. Notes are associated with exactly one request instance. and notes should never be used to reflect information conveyed in supporting info. So I might just jump to the spec here. And this is our AU eRequesting diagnostic request. And we have, oh, sorry, I'll jump to, yep, that's differential table. We have down the bottom here, note, and we've currently got it flagged as must support. And you can have 0 on many of these, and these are by the placer. But in our group pattern, there is a diagnostic request, one of these, an instance of one of these for each item ordered in the group. So if there are common notes, currently they would need to be duplicated in each of these service requests. Moving on, the request pattern for supporting info. So supporting info is information needed by the filler in order to be able to perform the order. In most cases, it refers to resource types that contain discrete information. This is a bit vague. This is straight from the spec though. These aren't my words. Can reference a document reference containing ad hoc clinical notes, and where a document reference is used to contain notes. They exist independently of the referencing request resource, have their own maintenance cycle, and can be linked to multiple requests or other resources. So there's some detail in here I don't think we should get too caught up in, like whether it's actually a document reference. But I think the key point out of this here is it can be linked to multiple requests or other resources. So this is about having a resource that could contain clinical notes, and then it could be linked back to multiple requests. And just, I might just jump back to the spec here again. So this is the note. This is what we talked about before. We also have in here a supporting info element. And at the moment, we've actually referenced that to pregnancy status. We've introduced that into the IG, and we've got an observation for pregnancy status. So in this case here, we haven't been explicit about how this works, but if there are multiple requests in the order or in the group, that they can all reference the same pregnancy observation. So in the same way, they could all reference the same clinical notes. If it was in another resource, they could reference individual ones. You could have different notes for different procedures or tests. But it gives you the ability, you're not tied to the note living within the service request itself. Now, there was a lot to take in there.
Does that mean that the note can exist on its own? Like when it
Yes.
got created, we don't know, but I'm just going to refer back to it now.
Yeah, I mean, it does say in here they have their own maintenance cycle. They exist independently of the referencing request. But that is the same pattern we've got there for that pregnancy status observation. So the pregnancy status exists, and it's referenced by the service request. We could get into other things about contained resources and the like, but again, I don't think that helps where we have a group and we want to sort of share common information in that group.
Because when it says it has its own maintenance cycle, it sounds like it's its own object that someone's managing anyway.
Yeah,
Well,
I mean,
that's where I think we've got to be careful in the language we use. So one of the things that distinguishes supporting information and notes is notes are contained within, as opposed to supporting information is an external reference, potentially.
I know we've talked about it before, but Angus, you talked before about some of the problems you have dealing with notes, and things you have to do when there's multiple items in a group.
Yes. So today in our interface, we use the service request note. Like there's a property on service request called note, which is sort of string text or something. And the problem with that, so the problem I have on the lab side, and I think I'm not alone, and I'm not saying everyone's like us, is when we receive order for pathology with many orders, a couple of tests on it, we create an episode in our system, and there's only one clinical notes for the episode, right? So we don't have clinical notes per test. We have clinical notes for the group of tests, right? And the problem I get is if the notes per test are different, you know, then all I can do is sort of collate them up into this episode note, like take each of them and append in with maybe a comma between them all, right? And that's problematic when they do something like, say, the patient is HIV positive, right? But that's not a note specifically for any one test. That's a general note about the request, right? You could say for the liver functions test, the patient is HIV positive. For the full blood count, the patient's HIV positive. And for MSU, you could say the patient's HIV positive, right? So now you've said it 3 times. Now, if the notes on each of them are equal to each other, so if I get all the notes and then just literally do a string match and say, does this note equal that note equal that note, and they all equal each other, then I can safely dedupe it, right? I can just go, well, I'm just going to say patient's HIV positive once in my episode notes because I don't want to say it 3 times because it just looks horrible and is cognitive load, right? But that then completely breaks down if someone then puts a note on one of those tests that's specific to that test, right? Like, I don't know, on the MSU, they might say, I don't know, after fasting or please, or 24-hour urine or something. It doesn't matter what they say, but it's something specific to that test. Now, when I try to dedupe, I can't, right? I can't take the risk of trying to go, oh, is HIV positive seen in these blobs of text and do I remove it and leave the rest there? It's just diabolically hard, right? And you wouldn't do it. So now you can't dedupe. And now you're going to get patient's HIV positive, patient HIV positive, patient HIV positive, 24-hour urine, right? And it's like, it's too hard to deduplicate. But so that's why we're sort of proposing models like this, where we have a single resource, be it document reference or whatever that is, because now I can deduplicate, right? Like if all tests point to the same document reference, then I don't need to deduplicate. I just go, well, they're all pointing to the same thing. So I'm going to put this text in once, right? Not 3 times. I'm just going to put it in once. So it solves that problem, this deduplication of clinical notes conundrum. And I will say, right now, our interface from Gentis, we have this sort of rather crazy hard rule that says if all the service request notes do not equal each other, we reject the order. And that's pretty ugly in itself, right?
Okay. I think that summarizes the problem. And basically what this is talking about is we have this supporting info that we can use to solve this problem. So this was talking in the context of going through request groups and identifying what we've done today, what we might need in the future, and whether we need to do anything different. But I think what this is highlighting is that supporting info is there for us to use to reference things that we want shared between the group. So it is there, it is described in the pattern. While some of this language is a bit strange or it doesn't help, it does give the indication of how we can use it. I did also just want to talk about the in the AU eRequesting data for interoperability. We had this definition for our guidance on clinical context. And this was narrative information providing an overview of the individual's current clinical situation. We've currently mapped this to the notes on the individual service request, but then we have all these problems that Angus has talked about. But there is an interesting point in here, this talks about historically many paper forms feature a section labeled clinical notes to document relevant background content for each service request. This data element has been purposely named clinical context to semantically differentiate it from the more generic comment, which allows clinicians to record any additional information not captured in semantically specific data elements. So I think an old version of that text did say to distinguish it from the fire note, but this has been made more generic now. But this is potentially what we could model as this clinical context that is then referenced by supporting information and available for all or as many as relevant service requests in the group.
I think this dot point's wrong here. Like, historically, many paper forms feature a section labeled clinical notes to document relevant background content for that. That's all correct up until this point. Relevant background context for each service request. They are using the word service request in the sense of the group, not in the sense of fire service request, which is singular.
Yeah, I think this text did change from feedback, but yeah, it was just highlighting.
And I do want to highlight, because someone pulled me up before, some systems can receive clinical notes per test, right? Cerner systems can. So it's, you know, my understanding is we certainly can't. I don't think Helios and ACL do, but a Cerner system can. So we can't just all go one way, right?
I think one of the advantages of supporting info is it can be one referenced by all items in the group, or it could be different supporting info for each item in the group. It kind of gives you the flexibility to do both.
Exactly.
Mix and match however you like. The problem with using just notes on the service request is it is only ever for that instance. Like, all the problems there about, well, is it copied across every item in the group, or is it different on each one? Then the filler has to work all that out.
But isn't the other challenge that the directions given for how you're supposed to use clinical notes and how you're supposed to use supporting information doesn't necessarily allow you to arbitrarily mix use of those different attributes and stick to the intent of the SPI spec?
Not quite following what you mean there.
No, I didn't quite follow either.
So supporting information as an attribute and notes as an attribute have guidance in terms of what you're supposed to use them for, regardless of the structure that they represent to do that. And so being able to switch, you know, I'm saying, well, I'm not going to use notes because it's actually it's embedded in the service request, as opposed to using supporting information because it provides more flexibility in the ability to share cross request that supporting information. Well, it'd be great if they had the same mechanism, and then, you know, you wouldn't be caught. At the moment, they have two different mechanisms of representation. So annotations is not anywhere near as flexible as these references. So, you know, I just don't think we can kind of throw away constraints that the existing service request specification provides for those two attributes.
Yeah, I guess I was leaning towards both are still valid. And maybe there's more water under this bridge, but, you know, let's say I've got something to say, you know, hello world. I could put that in the service request note, but I could also put it as supporting information as a reference to a document reference where I say hello world just for that service request.
Well, I'm not sure you can do that, because it depends on the semantics of hello world. So your example of HIV positive, right?
Yeah.
If you had a condition for instance, that was HIV positive as a condition, I think you could put that in the supporting information.
But not in note.
But
or
if you
not
had
formally in note.
simply a note that said patient is HIV positive, there wasn't set up as a condition and it was just an arbitrary piece of text, is that really appropriate? So I don't know the answer to this, because every time I read it, it's a little different, and it's also different between R4 and the build in terms of the guidance they give around that. So I just think we do need to be aware of that constraint, if there indeed is one, that, and whether we can just kind of make some more, we can add our profile can be more restrictive potentially, but still meet the intent of the original service request constraint.
So I was pleased to see someone put it at the Connectathon that in, I think, R5, service request note, the description of it changed, because in R4 it sadly says any other notes and comments made about this service request, for example, internal billing notes. And that example at the end just really put a spanner in the works, right? It's like, well, what do you mean for billing? Like, so can we not say HIV positive here? But then in R5, they extended that example and said, or something like, or other clinical information, right? They opened it up and said, no, you can put clinical information here. So I just want to make that
aligns
point.
with this. This is the R5 description here. It says notes can be clinical or administrative in nature.
Exactly.
I think the other key point here, though, is that notes should never be used to reflect information conveyed in supporting info. That's pick one, don't do it in both.
But I want to come back to Andy's point about the difference. Like the problem space for us here is written text, right? Because we don't know what it means. We're just like, it's a blob of text, right? If it's structured, if we as a group define a condition of HIV positive and we say you can put that in supporting information, then of course that's the advice, right? If you want to say this person's HIV positive, you create a condition, you put it in supporting observation. You don't just write in note, patient HIV positive. You could, but it wouldn't be right? Like, we have a formal way to say that, so say it formally with the resource. But the problem space, the problem one is written text, right? Because a human can say whatever they like, right? So, and if they say blah, 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 blah on one and blah, 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 blah on another, there's no way for us to like be able to dedupe them or understand what's being said. So I think, that written text is the problem one. Anything that's defined like a condition is, to me, not a problem. It just goes in supporting information and it's defined.
Where did you get that? I'm just looking at the R5 service request.note, and R5 service request.note still says in the definition, any other notes and comments made about the service request, for example, internal billing notes. Maybe that's changed in build. But it's certainly in R5, it's the same.
Classic, eh? This is classic dealing with text data as opposed to fixed stuff, right? Because it's a commentary. Sorry, the noise around me, but the commentary that we're putting in the notes, someone's going to read it. A machine's not going to read it. A person's going to read it and going to make decisions from that. So what we're worried about here is making sure we're not duplicating signal instruction somewhere or just finding the right spot to put it. They've been giving us lots of places to stick stuff. But in the end, it's going to be a person reading it, not a computer.
Yeah, and it's the duplication which is the problem. Like,
that's the biggest issue, is that with we wrestled with this with creating of the service request group, because it lets you put some shared information across multiple service requests in that group in theory, but you could do that with common references out of supporting information to the same piece of information. I looking through this, I can't see anything that that actually constrains note versus supporting information content?
But you mean constraint? I mean, we're never going to be able to stop. We create a condition called patient takes every positive, and we formalize that. We can never stop a human in a notes field typing this patient takes every positive, right? Like, but at least when
No,
it's
but we
duplicated,
would give someone a way of then if they want to apply information to the whole order, then the way to do that is use supporting information.
yes.
I think we want to move away from the replication entirely, and that you don't disallow use of note, but I think we highlight that supporting information and note should not overlap. That's one rule.
Yes.
And then another rule is if you wish clinical or administrative information to be applied to the whole of an order, then it should be represented in supporting information as a shared resource referenced from all service requests.
Yeah, I can see a future UI where there's a global comment clinical notes, which is what we're used to having. Like, write something here about the entire group, and then maybe, and we shouldn't be talking about UI, but then per test, maybe you can click a button and add a little note on one test, right? Like, you don't have to. Your UI might just have the global clinical notes, and you force them that when they write notes, it has to be like global, like, but if you want to go even further, you could, when they've ordered a MSU, click a button on that MSU and provide a little note about that MSU, and we'll put that in service request note, or as opposed to putting the global ones in say a document reference that they all point at.
I just want to, conscious of time, there's some other things I want to get through in this meeting. Because we don't have a proposal here on how to solve the notes, the clinical context. I think that's something we can look to prioritize. But I think, Andy, you summarized it quite well, which I think is reflected in this diagram about the intent about that shared information being referenced by supporting info. I don't know whether we want to formalize that or not now through a motion to say that this is the approach that we want to take for request groups and how we deal with common information, whether that's clinical notes or anything else that is shared between the group.
Well, given Angus didn't throw anything at me when I made my suggestion, I did take that as a good sign. And no one else did either. So I'm happy to put a motion on the table that we record that there is not to be overlap between the use of information represented in a clinical note in a service request.note versus that represented in service request.supporting information. So that's the first part. The second part is if there is an intent to specify common information, be it administrative or clinical, across the group of service requests within an order, then that should be represented as within the supporting information attribute as a commonly referenced file resource.
That's good. How'd you go with that, Christy?
I'll have to go back to the recording, but it was very nice and clear. Thank you, Andy.
Do we have a second for that?
I'll second it. Michael Osborne.
Thanks, Michael. All right. I'll watch poll. I can't even repeat that one. So it's a diagram, basically.
Still trying to think what you think you've hoodwinked over me, Andy. I'm not sure. It sounds right.
Let's go relaunch poll. Okay. All right, you should see a poll now, hopefully, for this motion. If anyone's got any comments or queries, we can cover that.
You can always diss it when we go to ballot.
Yeah.
Because we might find by then it's absolute garbage and we can't actually use it.
Yeah.
I wondered whether it could be simplified into just common clinical text. will be represented in a common supporting info resource.
I think we can
Well-
come around and we can do a more detailed proposal on the specifics of what because we don't know what that
Yeah.
resource is right at the
We're
moment.
heading
either,
in the right
so
direction.
It's more the intent. This is about intent. Okay, I'll just close that poll now. It looks like it's stopped. So we have 17 plus 1 in the chat, 18 affirmative, 0 negative, and 11 abstain. Okay, I just need to, I got out of whack there. I just need to get back to my slides. Okay, we've only got 8 minutes left, but I want to do a bit of a sort of check in on where we're at and where we're going next. So this is a summary of R1 features that we've already made decisions on. Most of these are in the IG already. If not, they're not far away because we've made decisions. We're just making the updates as we go. So we've got here payment options that have been covered through the diagnostic request insurance, and we have a new eRequesting coverage profile. We have a report distribution list, which is covered off by our copy 2 profile. We have service timing covered off by the diagnostic request occurrence, request grouping, which is what we've just been talking about, through requisition, place a group number, and the eRequesting task group. We have My Health Record consent withdrawal. We have our display sequence. We have fasting status. We have pregnancy status. Got urgent contact and patient contact. Those we've agreed on the outcomes for those, but they just haven't made it into the IG yet, so I can't reference those. But they will be in there shortly. And then one of our other features we talked about was Rule 3 exemption. So far, we've got quantity on the diagnostic request and occurrence, which cover off Rule 3 to a degree. I'm unsure whether that's complete, whether we need anything else to cover Rule 3. But really now is trying to work out, well, what next? We don't have a lot of time left for development of R1. So we're here now at the end of March. We're looking at maybe having a Spark test event at the end of June or July to do some more testing on the IG. And then we go into ballot for working standard in August. So what that means, between now and the end of June, we have about 5 or 6 meetings. In June, we need to do a content freeze for our ballot. So no more changes after June. From May to June, we need to start soliciting pre-ballot comments. So this is really trying to make sure that we resolve any issues that we know about or can find prior to going to ballot. What we don't want to go to do is go to ballot and have 500 issues get raised on our IG. We want to try and resolve as many of those issues as we can before we get to ballot. So this is trying to encourage things like we did today, raising JIRA issues on things that we need to update in the IG and doing that prior to ballot so we can make fixes before we get to ballot. End of June or July, we will look to do a Spark testing event and our Australian Fire Maturity Model approval. We're only looking at level 1, so that's basically making sure that we have no errors. So we need to go through that process. And then July is publishing preparation approval for an August ballot. So not a lot of time left, especially with only 5 to 6 meetings. We only get through a couple of items per meeting. And we previously had a list of a whole heap of features that we were looking at for consideration in R1. There's a Confluence page there, the links in the chat. This is just a summary of what some of those are. We had clinical context, which we just talked about then, those clinical notes, that narrative information, a problem diagnostic summary. These are from eRequesting, adverse reaction risk summary, implanted medical device, specimen, doctor codes, numbers, reasons for the assigned request. And then we also had other things like token barcodes, QR codes, security requirements, claiming an order, data exchange, model for creating an eRequest. So I think that's about whether we're using transactions or the like. So if we're going to add any more of these or anything else, we kind of need to have people help out with proposals, bring suggestions to the table of things that we need to get in the next few weeks prior to ballot, or what's important for us to prioritize. What do we look at? What's important to look at next? What do we think we might need that needs to be in this R1 that's going to ballot? This was just our guidelines for inclusion. We don't need to go through the detail here, but the key thing is to get in R1, it has to go through the technical design group consensus building within the R1 timelines. So we don't have a lot of time left to get to this R1 for ballot. So looking to identify anything else we need to prioritize now moving forward. We do have to do a lot of cleanup in the IG as well and provide some guidance and work around the side. It's not just about new profiles and the like. So I was, just to end this meeting off, I did just want to do a Menti. So if you've got a phone, or go to a browser and go to menti.com, I will launch this when I get to the right page. Yes. So these are the items I just listed, and it's a ranking. Ideally, if it doesn't need to be in the R1 ballot for comment, a ballot for working standard snapshot that we're going to publish in August, don't rank it. So what we're really only looking for here is things that, you know what, in the next few meetings, what are things we need to work on and try and get in the limited time that we have left. So these are the items that were from our features page that we identified before, but if you have something else, please prioritize other. We can then have a discuss about what that other is. But we are looking for some indication of what's important to work on next.
Michael, the stuff we just talked about with clinical comment, is that clinical context?
Yeah, it's clinical context. So clinical context is the notes and how we manage that. So we'll just use our last minute or so here to talk about that.
And is problem diagnostic summary included in clinical context?
Well, I think so the problem diagnostic summary is the AU eRequesting data for interoperability definition of it, which was in theory is structured data. Well, it is structured data. So I think our current position on that is we've actually said it would be in clinical context, and we would structure it later. But that's...
I'm more asking about problem diagnostic summary and whether that's exclusive of clinical context.
I interpret clinical context as being the free text comments, as opposed to problem diagnosis summary, adverse reactions, are structured clinical content.
Correct.
Specifically.
Yes.
What's data exchange model for creating an eRequest?
How we create an eRequest, I think. Again, we don't have really firm definition on this, but do we use transaction bundles?
Transaction bundle, right? Yeah.
Those sort of things.
Yeah.
Okay. That gives an indication of where to look to next. It does look like clinical context. We want to continue that conversation and come up with an approach to that. And tokens, barcodes, QR codes.
Interesting, that got so high.
Yeah. I'm curious that claiming an order didn't get higher.
Yes, I think. Yeah, I had it as too.
I voted twice, so I'm trying to get it up there.
Oh, no.
You game in the system. Like I said, this is just giving you give us an indication of what to work on next. We will still be pragmatic through meetings and things coming up. This is not a definitive. We're going to start at the top and go to the bottom, but it does give us an indication of where the interest is, because we do have to come up with proposals for these, and we may not be able to come up with proposals for these in the timeline as well. So while there may be interest in doing this, if we can't come up with a reasonable proposal in the time we have left, we won't be able to progress it. So it is sort of catch-22 there. Okay, that's good. And that gives an indication for the co-chairs of where the TDG priorities are at the moment. And we'll work through those and start discussing them in future meetings. And if you have proposals, if you already have concepts, you have ideas, we absolutely want to hear about it, because that's something that we need to develop. So if you've got ideas, please bring them. I will close that one off for now before Andy gains it.
Yeah, before he gains it further. See it move.
I just finish off next meeting. So on the 10th of April, and at this stage, we will continue to hold the one on the 24th of April. So thank you, everyone, and we'll see you next time.
Thank you, Michael.
Thanks.
Cheers.
you.
Thank you.